Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today I have quite the journey for you, and it's called Beyond Psychoanalysis, Morality, and Idealism. That's intellect and power, and we're looking at it through an evolutionary, not ideal or system, but what I think is a pattern that predates civilization and the state. But I'm going to get right into this because there's no point in wasting time. And I'd like to do this with as minimal editing. And so I generally shy away from scripts and essays because I think there's already too much of that out there. Too much of it dwells in the familiar and the known, which is why so much of it is the same or some various take or minor derivation when, thinkers through all history have thrown out endless theories and ideas without much of a concern for what they were doing. They were just doing the work. So the work's what's important here. And in terms of conception, I guess ontologically speaking, yes, it's more of a naturalistic approach. Uh, and what I wrote is, meaning our approach here predates not just civilization, which is the state, or as Hobbes described it, the war of all against all, held together with fear and tyranny and intolerance and cowardice, but also manifests, like imagining a natural order, chaining that order to a machine. But chains, like machines, inevitably break, be it through the perception of better or worse, right? Regardless of what anyone thinks about it. And with what I'm proposing here in a model of evolution based on human type theory is that civilization is the result when you bind the types through the machinations of state, technology, that which enables the tribe or the family to become a larger institution than what originally started as a personal affair, life itself. But what this means is that there is no universal telos. There is no, this is where Platonism, Christianity, Aristotelian thought, these sorts of ideals fall away because there is no common man. There is no average type of man. There are a multiplicity of types, and they vary in range in their functions and jobs and what they choose in life and what they do. So this is getting down to the base model to say all of humanity is modeling itself off of that which it doesn't understand, which are these kind of personality types that through all history have served different roles and functions, and who exist as they do. For most of history, the thought was you could just meddle from top down, and then only in the last century of thought, in thinking itself, did effect become a real concern. And by the time effect became a real concern, there's kind of an understanding that, oh, this thing's already in process, so we're only ever mitigating suffering and damage, right? It's already in motion. No one started or stopped it yesterday or today or tomorrow, and it's going to be no different 1,000 years from now. Fundamentally, with, I guess, from another perspective, is I was actually thinking about this from the Deleuzian model of the eternal recurrence, where he says specifically, yet we fail to understand the eternal return if we conceive of it as a ceaseless return of the same. Instead, eternal return inscribes difference and becoming at the very heart of being. Right, so because if you weren't returning, then you technically never left. What did you ever depart from? So the question is a point of origin. This has everything to do with memory and culture and humanity and personality. But that's exactly what we're going to further develop here. So, uh, humanity, in part and total, have never known what's going on, and to believe so is borderline insane. Science admits this in all destruction of purpose in nature, with pretense to order in nature, but is only on part of a process and set of ideas, categories, and methods. Right? It's not a belief system. It's not a stopping point. It's not a end in itself. It's one of many facets to humanity. Humanity, pre-civilization, evolved to be different types or subspecies, fundamentally divided in their introversion or extrovertive orientation, and are often comically blind to certain night and day differences in the distance and divide of that which is more akin to oil and water. So what I'm saying is certain types just don't mix or mix well. And amongst people who study it and who develop other ideas behind it, it's like that's kind of well understood. Types who get along well and types who don't get along well. And generally, birds of a feather flock together, right? Um, Another way I've said it is like cops hang out with cops, doctors and nurses with doctors and nurses, artists with artists, right? Philosophers with philosophers. So these types are what gave birth to the archetypes, the conception of roles, which uh, inherently contain ideas, tasks, paths, and assumptions. To this day, endless superstitions, and the archetypes themselves being the sets of possibilities and outcomes determined by what roles are or just that are or aren't important or available. So that's an important thing to note, right? Any given time or place, where do people feel like they have an identity and a place and a role? If you look through all human history, that very notion was crucial to anyone's way of life. And then the moment that way of life, i.e., that identity, that being is threatened, what results? Madness, war, famine, etc., the usual suspects. Um, so that's identity, that's violence. All of these roles and types are driven by their own functions and beliefs therein, meaning, and again, especially when people aren't created equal, it's very much, people kind of, there's a certain self-stratification and then there's a certain give and take. And if those things aren't met amongst people, they're not going to get along well. They're not going to tolerate each other, right? And this is what I think the modern media has done in a light speed culture where everything happens at once, where everyone can see everything at once, more or less, is that the vision begins to become clear about divides and differences in people. So as Marshall McLuhan pointed out, the global re-tribalized world village is an increasingly hostile place, an increasingly brutal place, an increasingly upset place. And I think part of within that divide is going to be people increasingly picking up on these patterns. Um, so, oh, and then I have a note here. I don't necessarily believe in an unconsciousness like anyone poses it. I guess I would put forth ideas of awareness, attention, cultural and linguistic resonance, and ultimately we're getting into memories that are yeah, we're getting into matters that are memories over time. Our type guides us to what we are. It's actually our own instincts, and that's how people stratify. That they wind up where they wind up tells you something about who they are, where they come from, and why they wound up there, why they chose what they chose. I'm saying it's quite contrary to that, that we're actually driven primarily by the functions of our personality type. So, roles, jobs, the body's very own agency of multiplicities and diversities, of even self-warring and self-styling as a crucial and vital aspect of being and becoming. So what I'm saying is that personality type has everything to do with what we are, what we do in the world, how we choose to communicate, our very own language, which is arguably a map of our own consciousness, made visible in whatever capacity a thinker, an artist, a philosopher, these different types might manifest it, and anyone else in their lives. So then the idea becomes patterning individual and collective life after an ideal, right? So no different than the higher ups setting the tone, setting the pace, setting the fashion, setting the style. Seneca says that, we live according to style or fashion, not reason. This is kind of the thing he's talking about. It fits right in time, right in turn with the eternal return of the same, but at the heart of it is difference, because otherwise there's nothing to depart from and return to. And what are we ever returning to? Ourselves, our attention, our awareness of our bodies in the world and what's really going on in the world around us is inferred by the senses. If there's truth to be had, it's through the senses. Where else would it come from? I guess it's associated to be a kind of like there's some invisible barrier where the sublime and the divine kind of pierce down into our brain. But I'm saying no, that idea of an external consciousness, maybe it's more like a living web in resonance with a certain curated archaeological um, curation of the world that we've seen in the last century, where by the time everyone was, done raping and robbing and pillaging, they started going, oh, maybe we should preserve things. Maybe we shouldn't destroy heritage. Maybe we should dig up more. Maybe we should figure out what's really going on here, right? Rather than just assume that the end was nigh. And that was the shockwave of history and eschatology, which basically in light speed culture takes us to the end of time, where we're just going, okay, we're post-history, pre-apocalypse, right? People want stasis, so history can't happen because you can't disturb the careful and totally destructive balance or seemingly schizophrenic balance of power. So moving on, human history and evolution shapes itself consciously. So this is might sound what would you call it? Controversial. I don't think it is, but I think history is nature's oversoul manifest in the most spirited animal on earth. That's us. And spirit isn't necessarily a good thing per se, because it's life cutting into life, where intelligence evolved to conspire with itself, both for and against itself. Whether, before it ever knew what it was doing, all this stuff was already en route. It was already processing. Things were being selected and deselected for before the animals ever woke up to what they were doing. Um, and I mean cooperation or competition. But individually and collectively, when pressurized and constrained by culture, language, violence, this becomes Hobbes' war of all against all. So this was the birth of civilization. This was the binding of many different types, including mutually hostile forces. Um, the animal's own drive for power. So democracy is being a temporary phase of civilizational decline, where false people wield real power before their culture as it was dies, having become more symbolic and symptomatic than a real people or society that can support itself. Democracy is the closest thing to anarchy while maintaining a new idol, i.e. the state. In modern terms, Hobbes' Leviathan. This is in I guess for Nietzsche's thought, this makes me think of his quote unquote super dragon. And this is where things get really interesting here, because we return to the origin of philosophy to examine just what was happening. Because what I said above about history is that part of that is to control and overpower whatever it is that needs to be controlled and overpowered. That typically meant that meant your own people, that meant enemy nations, that meant anything and everything that got in the way to your power, right? But the problem is power tends towards unity, which eventually breaks apart and up over time, right? Because you can see all these Western modeled and classicist civilizations eventually dry up, or maybe they're run ragged, it seems. Squandered would be the word, but we'll get to that. So this is the need of the noble lie. McLuhan, for instance, notes that Socratic contribution was to say, can you repeat that? Which is what Socrates introduced to the dialectic, which a cunning animal will infer Socrates' defense in this offense. From the fact that Socrates never wrote his philosophy down. This was wise. This was, good luck nailing blood to the wall, let's say. And he didn't let him do it to the end, right? And this reminds me, okay, so this is where things became really fascinating to me, because I thought about this for weeks. And Deleuze once said, thinking only became or becomes thinking with writing. And what he means, and I thought about that for weeks before I could even, just kind of reverse engineering my way forward and backwards with that thought process to see what he's really saying and how could that be. Because that means that he's saying thinking then would only be as old as writing itself, right? Because the idea is then, until you have that record, until you have that Socratic record in which you say, can you repeat that back to me? You're not actually thinking. You're living off the moment. You're living off whim, intuition, maybe even the most direct sensory experience of animal body itself, right? Not even thinking, not even intuiting, just kind of running with it, because I think intuiting and sensing actually kind of go hand in hand. But what's interesting here, so what he means is memory, the ability to examine, perceive, to re-perceive and perceive anew, right? To therefore consciously attempt to change and guide memory. Now, this is really cool, but actually McLuhan already said this in his own words. I caught it in one of his talks. I can't remember it off the top of my head here. If I can, I'll come back to it. But the idea was that you can now control things. You can now, right, because you can write it down and order it to be so, and then attempt to model that, right? It's a concept, it's a philosophy, right? It's not just asking a question, it's not just a question on meaning. It's the question of asking questions. It's the meaning of meaning. It's, that kind of thinking, right? It's an ongoing process, not an end or a stop itself. And this is the difference between people who do their thinking and philosophizing inside, like institution or academia, and those who kind of do it from the inside, right? It's the difference between doing it in the inside and the outside. So the point is that it's to write and rewrite memory, right? This is what the noble lie is, or so it's to change, guide, what's written. And then this is where I take a sort of seemingly unrelated shift, but it should be a pretty immediately apparent, where I say all of George Orwell's 1984 is predicated on this very subtle notion that what Socrates demonstrates is personal, individual. His daemon is his ego separation from the gravity of laws and customs and values of Greek culture, right? That's why it was considered bad taste. He was kind of throwing it back in their face, saying, can you repeat that? And then when it's revealed that they don't actually know what they're talking about or why they really believe what they believe, they're just doing as kind of members of a culture do, right? They learned that they're trained to be drones, they're trained to represent what they're trained to represent. Important here, Socrates preceded the modern technology of the book as novel entertainment or modern information process, right? Two different approaches to books: art and challenge, product and entertainment, or informative process, as McLuhan discussed. So, but he didn't precede the technology of writing, right? Writing had already existed. The Greeks came face to face with original runes that we don't understand to this day. However, he didn't write, he worked out his own head. He worked it out in his own head, right? Because he didn't write it down, and he got other people to repeat it. And this is eventually what Plato wrote down. So in the novel or the book or in the playwright format, which Plato was a playwright, right? He was an artist himself who ironically or unironically, however you want to look at it, banished the poets, right? This is why it's an eternal return. And this is where I'm also going to point out Nietzsche is a similar genius from his own self-described process, purportedly writing whole paragraphs and books in vital creative flourishes. And any kind of artist or human being who's generally been struck by a creative muse and impulse understands this totalizing process, this driven process where finally the multiplicity of diversities of one climaxes in a moment, whether that's sex and orgasm, or the approach to the creation of a work of art, and finally its creation, arguably of which the hunt has been the most exciting part all along. So it is why culture winds up being kind of lame, especially in modern times, because it's a repetition of repetition. The hunters have all gone home to roost, you could say. The punk rock has been domesticated, right? Everything's been commercialized and devalued and brought down to nothing, so people have to act really stupid for any sense of attention. This is also part of the bread and circus of the global village. You see the increasing inanity and insanity of what people do to become noticeable, to say, hey, I'm an individual, hey, I'm worthy of attention and time and love and whatever kind of validation the generally extroverted sensory world orients itself towards. Because as Carl Jung points out, a country like America, where I'm from, because remember, I'm discussing these things from the Western perspective, but cultures can be either more introverted or extroverted oriented. In the West, as Jung says, is extroverted as hell. The introverts don't stand a chance. Usually, I could talk about a lot of the pathology and dysfunction at work in the world and in America, which I don't necessarily want to do here because it's supposed to be beyond psychoanalysis. But what you can see is that people often don't even make it out into the world to be devoured by the forces therein. They're often devoured by their family first and foremost. So again, points of origin become big matters of difference in identity, in people and their violence. So we've been discussing this from what Socrates introduced to the dialogue and the dialectic, which became part of the medium. When new mediums are created, people still live in the old ones. So even though the book was written, people still taught, people still discoursed. Who? Was it the working class? No, it was generally the people who had time to have salon, right? In modern terms, it's bourgeoisie and decadent. But, from the other side of the coin, you'd say decadence is just a form of perception. It's technically not even real, right? Because it's part of this eternal return. So this also led to, again, the point is memory. I was talking about Orwell before I got kind of off sidetracked there, but it's predicated on this notion that Socrates demonstrates his personal individual right, his separation. Socrates preceded the modern technology of the book as novel entertainment. Our modern information process didn't precede writing. However, he didn't write, he worked out it in his own head. Oh yeah, I was saying that Nietzsche also wrote in creative flourishes. I got sidetracked with the muse. Related, how could have Socrates ever written his own story? He would have never been able to solidify long enough to account for or write even his own ending. He projects it onto Greece and is satisfied with his mischief. Nietzsche was a similar rat catcher, right? He projected his power into the world and became a sort of magnetic or a verbal resonance for all great and small men alike to be seduced, because this gets to what I was saying about the noble lie, is all the ruling class values as projected values, protected, imitated, aspired to, conditioned, beaten into, tortured out of, even unto collapse. That is language, morality, and justice, all are parts of this noble lie that doesn't even have a memory system, or that didn't even originally have a monetary system, but instead a slavery and fierce exclusion and execution, stamping out of real potential power. Power's demise is overhunting its food source, over exploitation of its own food source. So back to my definition of history, it's intelligent humanity hunting on anyone and anything less intelligent than it. Because the whole thing about being a hunter is you get in the head of your prey. So this is how humanity has controlled humanity for all time. So be it with other nations or its own people, right? Because both are a source of food to the ruling class. Always have been, always will be. So values and morality or language are upheld by a culture as stories for children. Zaf, we allow children to have their illusions until they can afford to lose them. Culture, its power, never catered to or counted on becoming completely camouflage, an impossibility of a light-speed civilization. This is where McLuhan says, a polite society is predicated on the fact that you can actually behave in such a manner, or if not, you better be really good at hiding it. So, and then this was tech mediums, or what put an end to polite and private society. So this was where the book, the novel, the mass production and proliferation created a general public who had a general wealth store. See, this is where, again, where I think it's less about something like the unconscious or the collective unconscious, but more like the living and breathing wealth store that's kept alive and broadcast by a people. So, and then electricity brought the birth of the masses, which were all recent inventions in the last 500 years. So by book and electricity, respectively, past hyperreality encroaches the technological and dangerous wilderness. Hyperreality exists so you think reality is real. What is shown in the media is not meant to be seen, but is some unrelated and localized subject and object relationship, discrete parts, right? That by now, I guess with the term brain rot, you can understand in all media how the schizoid decay is apparent, right? And I'm quoting David Foster Wallace on E Unibus Plurum. If you guys want an education in kind of the medium as the message, television culture, how that kind of led to, our present global not so tolerant world village, I'd suggest you check it out, and maybe I'll put the name in the description. But again, right, so you go to Disneyland, so you go, okay, we know this is fake, and then you go out in the real world and you go, but this is real, right? Discrete subject and object relationships. And then all of it's formulated upon mass manufactured, mass communicated opinions, ideologies, general madness at the human condition, right? That's what you see. Madness and violence are enticing. They sell. They get people excited. What begins as general paranoia is full-blown, I guess what people tend to think of as cultural psychosis or other recent terms, mass psychosis formation. But as Nietzsche says, this is the rule of humanity. This is how it goes when technological and social and religious changes sweep in, right? Disasters. And this gets into the point of why you need the noble lie, is that what we all find out is that memory is easy to disrupt, to change, to subvert, to get back to serving someone or something else, to keep it running in circles, to promise it a better tomorrow. But in the day-to-day process of living, everyone gets to forget that they're having like a collective hallucination of support sorts. The word samsara comes to mind. But so what in the illusion here was that a single savior, or religion, or culture, or language, or system, or nation was ever going to save or redeem anyone or unite everyone, right? That is just the most, like, the furthest fetched thing. It is very, I guess even the Greeks would call that hubristic, right? They would already know, but they had it built in that, for every victory christened by the god Nike, that Nemesis was on the way. Like it was coming for you. So the circle has not changed because the nature of its fundamental makeup has not changed. What humanity is are a set of local intelligences and personality types who cooperate and compete to meet their personal and collective goals. And belief in the personal is a recent invention in the history of man and his world. And the personal is actually was the isolation in the creation of the individual through suffering and mass forces, which separates and delegitimizes the individual from each other and alienates everyone to one another. But at the same time, the whole change with our lightspeed culture was to re-tribalize the world. See, people think they try to attack the ideology. That's like grabbing the tail of the snake or the head of a previously cut off hydra. Actually, in terms of Powers Disappearing Act, it's the head of a hydra. And at that point, it doesn't even matter because we're going to get into the headless hydra shortly. Responsibility infinitely recedes into the background, and basically AI will be a sort of future autocracy where the masses are just kind of processed because, as you can see from modern culture, if you look at the world, the question is, when do people's patience run out? When do their tempers run out? Right? When everyone's on top of each other, when everyone's exploiting each other, when everyone's angry and revengeful and upset and paranoid, right? Like in times of mass catastrophe and change, right? Concerns over what the future holds, which is where this essay ends, or not essay, but where this intuitively processed, because I wrote all this morning, and just kind of let it go. So all of nature has its own season, rhyme, and reason, but only man believed he learned to order the environment, humanity, in maintenance mode, preserving the human condition like an art exhibit or archaeological exhibit, right? That's the thing. Now it's maintaining stasis because we see with hundreds of millions and then billions of us is that there's not enough materials to give everyone the middle class fantasy. And in a country like America, even, it looks like the average person and people in general were deselected for. Not just like it's an economic culling, it's a famine, and famines are man-made. So, like, it's not that the resources aren't there. We're going to get to that though. Culture is stasis. If the church could have kept humanity in the Middle Ages until the year 4000 AD, it would have. Similarly, if the corporation states or new idols that run and own the globe could have kept producing photographic paper, fax machines, and political lobbying, therefore, to keep these models intact, American Western stylized capitalism and its liberalism would have kept the world in the early 1980s for another 2,000 years. Technology and the new modern notion of concern for human safety, right, the effects, and concern for suffering has swamped all old and new idealism in the leftover and ongoing poison pools of all religions and ideologies. Right? People are left to fester and suffer. Technology forces changes on both power and social systems. One comes before the other. The social one provides the nice story, though. So the concern for effect, once considered at all in private and public life, now becomes the final grave for history and civilization. This was Deleuze saying in Intellectuals and Power that from the initial inquiry that we're taught we're supposed to ask, basically it leads you to the conclusion of blowing it up and destroying it. And this isn't legal or medical advice. I'm not encouraging that. He's pointing out that the child's original impulse is absolutely true to the nature of how it seems humanity feels about everything. Brings us to our point. Civilization is a war of all against all, but what is history? History is human intelligence shaping and controlling itself, conspiring with itself, and by this nature, um, and by this nature, other selves. Personalities push each other around in both competition and cooperation. Culture is a noble lie because there is no community or games to play when everyone cheats and takes more than they give, right? Isn't that everyone? Similarly, Hunter S. Thompson wrote, the only crime in a closed society is honesty or stupidity. From here, systems of power or intellectuals have always fed off of other people, the slaves, the public, and now the masses. Power moves from at sword point imposition to, right, for the most violent of people to ever more meaninglessly nebulous forms, camouflage, sophistication. Average subtypes of humanity are kept out by lack of sophistication. Right, and people just can't keep up with the changes and the destruction and the greed. What the masses continue to learn is that religion, culture, and state aren't their friends and never have been. The most helpless and powerless are always the greatest proponents of tyranny, right? Because with the ass kissing, with the paycheck, they have a good time. So in short, the human is a predator, regardless of place and time. Just as cats have to understand birds' physiology to hunt them appropriately, right, stealthily, so it is auxiliary and enemy, cop and criminal, Pharisees and free thinkers exist as evolutionary balancing forces of the human overmind, of intelligence, that constantly attempt to correct one another, i.e., highest ordering values and principles, justice versus injustice, a total mythology. History is the story of predator and prey and the pressures therein, the evolutionary arms race therein. Like if we look at what point did a spider or a scorpion diverge from each other? At what point did the power move towards the tail? So clearly either the spinnerets and the web gave way, right, to completely different hunting styles. You see, one is a domestic hunter, right, creates a house. The other one remained a hunter and never left the ground in some sense, right? And stayed underground. And I guess a lot of spiders did too. Right now we're getting into whole notions of exploration here into how these predators and preys and right, because remember, predators also feed on predators. Um, so what I'm getting at though is you see, regardless, is that where forms exist, nature loves novelty. Nature seems to love, humanity seems to love pushing things to their furthest limits to create new and beautiful things. I don't know how beautiful to most people arachnids are or humans are, but idealistically, they're quite beautiful, right? At their most beautiful, right? It's part of our whole procreative process. So it seems like all these capacities exist within nature. There's no part of this that's unnatural or outside of it, and it seems to will itself to be in process of human social endeavor or simple carrying capacity of an environment. Oh, I guess I was writing that it's something like nature pushes this to its extremities as far as human will allows until some carrying capacity is met, till something in this pressurized system blows out. Um, Having taken over the globe, mass man now builds horizontally inwards, the physiology expanding of our electrical networks. Right? It's like building. Like McKenna's vision of it was a sort of human, this is the closest thing to the unconscious would be this large, like if it wasn't real before, now it's real only because we've manifested in a system that seemingly exists outside of ourselves, away from everyone's actual tampering or control. Like it's actually gotten away from everyone. So maybe that's what it is if it's real, right? But regardless, man is pushed inward, and a lot of people aren't seekers. A lot of people, right, the dominant types are extroverted and sensor oriented, to where those old world values of, hey, everyone was going to have a family and a future and a nation and property. It's like, no, part of what McKenna predicted and encouraged out of necessity was the need to again kick out the ladder during the perennial liberal freakout of the ending of the 19th or the 20th century, was that because the more dependent humanity is on these electric networks, the greater the disaster will be. And that's because what we're going to have is a future of billions of, like, I think, just serfs and renters, and the most they can have is digital assets, right? Because other people already took everything else, right? That's the direction everyone's being pushed in and selected for, or deselected for, because if they can't actually have children, they can't actually procreate their bloodline. So I think a lot of, just like a lot of businesses and ways of doing business, it will continue to change and die out. So will people in their bloodlines, no different than any other animals. So civilization is this intelligent, forever cutting the rungs out from whoever their competition and opposition is. The intellect or psyche and personality cannot be conferred to the masses, since the mass equalizes and negates all potential threats and power. All right, the lesson learned from history is you can't let individuals become too powerful. And if they do, they become they become points of interest to their competing powers. So the inverse becomes, right, they become too much of interest to their competing powers, and this is where competition eats each other. So the inverse boon or blight of power's competition over time. That's what all that is, right? That it dooms itself. It eventually says, I'm the only one, and then it stagnates, rots, dies, and then another animal overtakes it, or some unforeseen disaster happens and changes the course of the planet's evolution. So you can pull a mask off, but another mask will be found in its stead, right? So this is a proverbial game of power. Just when people grab onto the tail of it, it changes. So, put otherwise, the masses and individuals have always mistrusted individuals, for these often vicious and power-hungry types have proven themselves to be the very manifestation of the demand on small and large-scale squandering of all resources, including humanity, the most useful beasts of burden. Foucault writes about this process of stealing the loot and kicking out the ladder and how that works. And he wrote, the intellectual was rejected and persecuted, the precise moment when the facts became incontrovertible, when it was forbidden to say the emperor had no clothes. And to cut to the short of it is to say the masses don't need power to speak for them. It's pretentious that anyone dares to speak for anyone else, when now more than ever it's been democratized, at least through social media, to which we could also say, I think, part of a lot of the reaction and aggression in these mediums and to other people is a reaction just to selves to other selves, types to types, that from above, they do so themselves. Everyone is scrambling, with everyone screaming, almost nobody's listening. It's a modern form of everyone being wired into their own survival trip, right? And that's that, again, people seeing what people are like and how they behave, they come to despise each other. They come to tolerate each other less. As McLuhan points out, especially for the optimistic and idealistic type, nowhere in history do people get piled on top of each other and forced into terrible conditions, and then they become better, nicer people for it, right? The future is going to be increasingly, we've already seen it, right? So I'm only describing what is. If you see that people are becoming meaner, colder, more isolated, more nasty, understand that's part of the evolution process. That's prey animals. Some of that is people getting lost. Part of that is people wising up. So it goes both ways. So again, the masses don't need anyone to speak for them. And I guess the regret becomes instantaneous, because once everyone can speak for themselves, everyone goes, oh no, don't show us that. Oh no, we didn't want to know that. Oh no, we didn't want to see that. We didn't need to. I got my fill today, right? No more of this. It's patience, right? Patience and tolerance run out quickly, right? And the people at present has squandered what little was built up by the past. That's always what happens during times of peace, which is why, an epileptic type, a strong type comes along, makes a mess of the place. And that is the state instinct. This is what Nietzsche describes at work in The Greek State. But I was talking about it from Foucault's perspective, was that was the point. You give people the means to do it, and no longer can anyone claim to be, and I guess this lines up with McLuhan pointing out that these old professional types, there is something to specializing to the point of value, but that's not the point here. He was talking about how these old professional types didn't understand. It's no different than how Hollywood's been eclipsed by mindless TikToks and social media, no different than how literature was eclipsed by, trashy novellas and, entertainment like that, right? That these things get overwhelmed in a flood of individuals and masses and the formula therein. So, what I was saying, and more specifically, what Foucault is also is getting at is that once the individual grasps a tentacle from the hentai demon of power, it slips loose and is offered, and then the individual is offered 100 tendrils more. And this starts getting into the future, right? This beast is modern, power totalizing, eventual control of utter, free and real humanity. I need to better read that. And then this beast here, this beast of many tentacles, is the modern power totalizing, eventual control and autocracy of anything like a free humanity or a real humanity, individuals and responsibility, right? This is what I was saying about power increasingly disappearing, responsibility being infinitely deferred. Power struggle gave way to a dragon, was slain over and over, now manifesting itself as a headless hydra. Oh, there we are. There it is, the headless hydra, Leviathan. This is technological Leviathan. If AI has an ultimate end and goal, it's permanent stasis and a sort form of autocracy, a way of proverbially keeping the people at the bottom, where history has tried to keep them all along. And I'll explain this shortly. The same as the power game is always being played. Luckily, reality interferes constantly with general humanity and also intellectuals. And I say this social understanding finds its physical representation in Orwell's book 1984, discussing power relations of owner and slave classes or worker classes, right? The proletariat, the inner and outer party members. What we're getting at here, though, as Orwell describes, is basically the recent technological revolution. See, the questions around AI at the moment are all wrong. None of them actually concern themselves with the reality, saying, hey, if all technology has been about power control and squandering resources rather than letting them fall into enemy or other people's hands, then how would it be that AI is for anyone's benefit? How would it be that, just like the previous industrial revolutions, that the machines were going to free people to become free, to make art, to do, right? Like, no, this doesn't pan out. This is the poet laureate of the American trash heap, Charles Bukowski, pointing out that there's a war of attrition on genius, actually. The more mass communications and the more mass fabricated culture that says and does the same things, the less and less chance of even creating a genius is there, unless under the worst circumstances, which is why the liberal tendency of trying to stop suffering basically is like smothering people with a pillow of pity, rather than actually helping them or respecting them as aspects of nature who have their own will to power. But what Orwell says here is the new doctrines arose, this is in 1984, and I think this was from something like the history of oligarchy or whatever it was, collectivism, or the real history of humanity. And it says, the new doctrines arose partly because of the accumulation of historical knowledge and the growth of the historical sense, which had hardly existed before the 19th century. Interesting to note here, what McLuhan talks about is that a lot of the whole world was forced to modernize, to even compete, stay relevant, to live, to survive, right? To prevent from being completely overpowered with the technologies, right? So a lot of the world didn't have the 19th century that America or the Western world had, but they live with the effects of it. So basically, all of culture the world over got instantly rewritten, right? Memory changed the world over. Memory became increasingly an exhibit in a museum and less a day-to-day experience, right? So the cyclical movement of history was now intelligible, or appeared to be so. And if it was intelligible, then it was alterable, right? This was the, can you repeat that? Oh, look, we have this thing called memory. Oh, look, we can control and change that. But the principal underlying cause was that as early as the beginning of the 20th century, human equality became technically possible. And I think he's right here. I think he's actually correct. It was still true that men were not equal in their native talents and that functions had to be specialized in ways that favored some individuals against others, right? And it's always been the intelligent, right, feeding on the least and vice versa. But there was no longer any real need for class distinctions or for large differences of wealth. He's saying that there was enough surplus that Plato's utopia could have been realized insofar as there existed no prophets because there was no monetary system. But what happened in that system, in Plato's Utopia, his play, right, his fiction, is that the surplus went back to the classes that produced it, right? So it was intelligence protecting itself by giving everything back to everything below it. And then that is not what our history has been. Our history has been the opposite of this, which is what, this is the irony of, the evil empire isn't real. But he says, the cyclical movement of history was now intelligible, blah, blah, blah. It was still true that men were not equal, right? Read that. In earlier ages, class distinctions had been not only inevitable but desirable. Inequality was the price of civilization. In earlier ages, class distinctions had been not only inevitable but desirable. Inequality was the price of civilization. With the development of machine production, however, the beings to do different kinds of work, it was no longer necessary for them to live different social or economic levels. Therefore, from the point of view of the new groups who were on the point of seizing power, human equality was no longer an ideal to be striven after, but a danger to be averted. In more primitive ages, when a just and peaceful society was in fact not possible, it had been fairly easy to believe it. The idea of an earthly paradise in which men should live together in a state of brotherhood without laws and without brute labor had haunted the human imagination for thousands of years, and this vision had a certain hold even on the groups who actually profited by each historical change. The heirs of the French, English, and American revolutions had partly believed in their own phrases about the rights of man, freedom of speech, equality before the law, and the like, and have even allowed their conduct to be influenced by them to some extent, right? They're modeling something. But by the fourth decade of the 20th century, all the main currents of political thought were authoritarian. The earthly paradise had been discredited at the exact moment when it became realizable. This was the bait and switch that got pulled on Marxist ideology. That in theory, he was right. In reality, he was wrong. So, right, that was the problem with the ideologies. As Terence McKenna says, in the modern age, right, as someone who did a complete about-face on Western culture, he saw it wasn't anyone's friend, just like religion, that these were all means of control. So how the intelligent feed off the less intelligent, and the devil always takes the hindmost. That's why to the herd, that's a saying. The devil does take the hindmost. We're seeing these realities pile up. So back to what we were discussing on Foucault and individuals, I mentioned that as represented in Orwell's 1984, the moment it became possible. The reason why AI will be no different, it'll just be another form of control and squander, a perpetual controlled burn, rather than a giving, because, and then if people didn't have bread, what would become the struggle then? Because we already see that now. People don't have to be starving to have a struggle. People don't have to be in the worst conditions to, in essence, have it bad, be it from bodily conditions, life experience, right? There's a lot of things that have to do with the individual and their psychology that are not accounted for by wide systems of power, whose, again, otherwise point is just to keep things in stasis. So the idea that AI is to free anyone is a total lie and misnomer. It's a misdirect. And even and here's the other one, the concern that it's going to destroy humanity or hurt them something. No, it's there to control. It's understanding that people are nuisances. They suffer from madness and problems. They're dangerous. The whole system is burdened by people every step of the way, dragging it down, scamming, feeding off of it, taking more than they give. Who doesn't try to take more than they give? If everyone wants the American dream and the ideal material existence, the extrovertive sensory existence, right? What's the price of that? What's the cost of that? Oh, wait a minute, no one was going to share that anyway, right? That's why people protect themselves within these networks of intelligences. So soft pseudo-tyranny, people will take imitation of power over real power. This is why money and Italian bookkeeping is popular among all mob states and the masses. Money is a stable payoff for most because it's a suitable recompense for any and all neutralization of their personal being, and power is a single node in a larger network of nodes and control. The crux, the personality types find themselves naturally stratified in whatever time and place they're born. The process and power struggle never truly ceases or starts. The middle is everywhere, as Zarathustra says. can only be ongoing. We're all loosely or tightly wired in doing our own things, have our own aims and goals. We align, we don't align, right? All these things in a world of different people and types who perceive and sense the world very differently and don't understand one another. There's no freeing anyone. There's no relieving an individual or a type without freeing. Oh, and I had this thought. If you can figure out how it's might be true, there's no freeing anyone um, without freeing the individual of a type, without freeing all types from the very sets of loosely interconnected rings that they are. This was Deleuze, I guess, saying that if something is true, a resonance over here will change something over there. That's how you know a model and a theory, by effect and affect. It's both. Like McLuhan says, most people don't actually communicate. What they instead do is kind of just say a bunch of words and not realize that it's not the words they're saying that mean anything, it's their effect. So they don't realize what they are or aren't capitalizing it. I think I've heard both poets and philosophers say things like a lot of times geniuses don't realize what their best and worst traits are. Maybe cultures and collectives are no different too, right? Because the power is clearly real. How it manifests is frightening and terrible to everyone in large part. Um, because I wrote, everyone becomes equally powerless therein, right? The owners are still attached to the workers. Um, Except owners of resources, including humanity and their forced labor, will accept those people, right? Whoever's like this off in their own world, right? Everyone wants to be so fortunate. That is the fantasy. And so if people are that fundamentally irresponsible, what's that tell you about culture, right? That we are going to need AI to take care of the future, because like there's nothing in our school system or elsewhere that has been educating people to actually cope or deal with reality. Otherwise, there would have probably been McLuhan 101 for the last century, or the last 30 years. But they basically set him aside and missed his real relevance actually. So modern tech made new power networking available, but history taught the world the individual is always a threat. Culture is paranoia. That's what institution is. It's meant to investigate, attack, and destroy, right? All those sorts of things. Fake authority is designated by a trite and dated model of professionalism, which is actually a very narrow scope. Oh, I mentioned this earlier. Yes, that I get it. There is money in professionalism, but that old world model that the world was just going to provide you a place and things were going to be simple, and if you just did the same thing as everything else, as everyone else, you could have the same dream and ending as everyone else, which is a happy ending. People find out quickly, if they're not naive, that this isn't true, and if you're not careful, you will be someone else's prey. But the most narrow of scope and knowledge and application, the broader scope behind the narrow one, always eats the other, and the future sneaks up on the present from behind. The point isn't education, freedom, or ease. Incidentally, these are mythologies, and they've kind of worked out, right? That like the hyper reality notion, it's just kind of fictional enough to be plausible for you to suspend your disbelief on it, right? So the story has to sound good. If I dumb it down for you in the modern world, I could say, come play a role. You can pretend to work, and they'll pretend to pay you. That people, I'm not going to say everyone does have the same craving for meaning in life, because arguably the meaning of life has been apparent and written down and recorded in memory for a long time standing. It's that what I said, everything about modern life is for people who want to project their understanding. There's no reasonable assumption that anyone understands anything, or that the positions they held were something that they ever read or understood or logically reasoned themselves into, rather than being part, parcel, product, and subject to these larger systems of power, right? Culture, institution, paranoia, authority, knowledge, its application, change over time. So what I said is all these other, the effects are incidental, and only recently they've become studied. But again, come play a part. They'll pretend to pay you, and you can pretend to work. The pay is jack shit, but will let you exist. Sincerely, the corporation state. It doesn't inspire confidence or trust in the corporation and state. When everyone can see that it's a pirate and a private endeavor, and everyone else just gets peanuts the world over. I've mentioned this before. Some people are slaves still. Some people work for 50 cents a day. Some people work for $7 an hour. It's a scale, and the top few, right? It's just, that's all it is. So you can't even see the top from the bottom, and that's by design, right? That's the noble lie. That's why you come out of the earth and they exist up on Mount Olympus. And it turns out the top of Mountain Olympus is a spreadsheet and a graph. There is no oneness or unified humanity. There are those who feed and those who are fed upon, as designated in and by those with power, whatever the power might be. So I'm saying this happens everywhere, right? This is Manson in his cult, or Ted Kaczynski and his own mad mission, right? But that America produces both of these nuts on the opposite side of the spectrum is quite telling. So the idealism of culture is the fantasy, the lie, the carrot on a stick. Eventually, the driver gets greedy and eats the carrot. The kickback is inevitable from the mules, especially when one uses the empty stick as a weapon and realize for what it is: culture, conformity, fakeness, insincerity, lies, ignorance, and arrogance, all the best and worst of individuals and collective, tied together, that creates our reality, the power of greater forces beyond any individual or group's true control, right? And this is me saying beyond psychoanalysis, right? So we're past ourselves and our own individual hangups, and then beyond morality, which is belief in good and evil, which is the higher ups value system that makes a culture even function, by way of hatred, destruction, devouring other people, gobbling down their souls, hoarding the wealth, right? Doing what humans have always done. So the illusion is control. This is about hunting and patterns. Hunting and patterns, memory itself. Culture is a shared memory. If people can't share it or become sophisticated enough to participate in what modern culture has become, inside or outside this collective hallucination, powers that be will increasingly control and automate the processes and consequences of said power and control. It's inevitability. Even with population decline, it's inevitability, because there's so much to try to control for in the individuals and groups. The individual is the worst and most disruptive thing to truly happen to any culture, right? Like, why shouldn't we be drones like bees? Why shouldn't we all be the same? Why shouldn't we all toe the party line, take the payout, commit the crimes, and then, call someone else evil? Who's evil? He who resists our power, obviously, right? So the culture exists to eliminate, destroy more forces. The reason why everyone is frightened for they have their own desires, needs, wants, selfishness, position, pay, is because people don't want, is because, wait, pay is because people don't want to survive. They want power and sex or procreation. Oh, yeah, I think I was just again kind of reiterating that the pay is the substitute where everything else fails. Um, if you erase collective and individual memory and make it impossible for such things to exist, teach, or impart themselves, then we all individually dissolve into a meaningless concept like mass man, or even Nietzsche's last man. If humanity has always been resented, hated, killed, and enslaved by intelligent, powerful humanity, rest assured it's all justified and maintained, meaning intelligent, powerful humanity intends what they intend and does what they does for a reason. Wherever these pretensions may be found, always the weaker and stupider humanity deserves it, according to the stronger, is what I'm saying. Yeah, I think is where a lot of people from the bottom have caught on, regardless of how intelligent they are. They do recognize how much they are resented by other people, right? Especially who, I guess, the term elite carries the whole war in it, right? Don't be mistaken by the race war, the class war, the caste war, right? The reality war, different types. Intelligent humanity feeding off those who are behind in whatever capacities. So once and final, history is a record of intelligent humanity culling itself and others for its own ends. The point isn't culture, prosthetics, ease and comfort, or even medicine. The point is controlling and overpowering other people for one's own purpose. And then from there, maintaining hegemony, maintaining power. There's three superpowers, and they're not going to let up anytime soon. They can't. They wouldn't. There's nothing to replace them anyway. In the global savage lightspeed village, that means both controlling and distributing as much information and misinformation as possible, right? It's all the same thing at this point. Freedom must always be the impossible ideal striven for, because without it, slavery and loyalty isn't possible. Power only maintains total control by accounting sense, feeling, and thought perceptions of the past, therefore the present, therefore the future, right? He who controls the past controls the present, controls the future, because the future of the future is the present, right? It's a circle. Humanity is memory. Humanity is memory. What is everyone at present remembering? What will they be remembering into the future? It's easy to take for granted our position here and now, but I think in the future, a lot of families and their wealth will have been devoured by famine and corporation state. A lot of that stuff is just going to disappear. The middle class will be some quaint record of history. Like they'll be seen in 1,000 years from now, the middle class will be seen as some tribal organization, right? I'm just giving you some perspective, I think. No different today, but it's no different than what it's been generally. So all programming is the programming, broadcasting out as much as pushing the individual inwards. Different types have different relations to each other and their own individual relation to the world. I think I'm finally getting to the end here. Like I said, it was a lot to cover. It's quite the journey. Extroverts and introverts, they all play their part, right? They all have their place in the world, and they have their part in the power struggle, but struggle is only ever has one end, and that's everyone's demise, including civilization itself. In some sense, history is alive as ever. In another sense, most everyone is wired into the larger power grid in smaller, large ways, no escape, meaning humanity is present for one to really witness new eyes opening in new ways. To most of the world, history is over and has one end. To the rarest few, they have the gift of life to inherit and to re-give. And what I'm saying is, there's going to be classes of poets and thinkers and artists of which, I'm not going to say classes, there's going to be very rare few who are of the likes of which the world has yet to see and has never been seen. That's going to continue as well, right? Nothing arrives unannounced. So don't be fooled by the small and large power games. Extroverts and introverts are very divided. See how they organize what they value. Real friends and enemies are only met and created here. Seek and know by what they give or take from the world, and be blind to this no longer. Right? Not everything is meant for all ears. So I think I meant to stop there, but I wrote one more page. So I mentioned of the extroverted sensor world, that with those dominator type values not being allowed to be shared anymore, with men being thoroughly declawed and domesticated over time, thoroughly constrained and contained, and increasingly panopticonical, Brave New World 1984-esque, tentacles of control and surveillance and institution just in and out of everything. It means that these previously dominant values have been deselected for, which does give introverts and intellectuals the highest advantage, as they've had in all history, so long as they had enough supporting power, right? But the way this is playing out is like McKenna saw it. Like, it's going to be a world of renters on the electric grid in a major way, buying and selling digital assets and subscriptions, right? They won't have property anymore. They'll have less and less family. Like American comedian Tim Dillon says it, that it'll be just like it was before, a pretense to like family and life and da-da-da, but a lot more sad, but nobody will notice the difference. That's a 1984 element. Maybe all the hatred will eventually blow up and give way to a more stable sadness of humanity, where they can just kind of exist in a sort of not quite dead, not quite alive state, right? Where we keep reproducing the same art in things over and over again, because everything and everyone has become creatively bankrupt, because there's just simply too many people clamoring for too much attention, trying to jockey in position where arguably there's too many actors where they don't belong, even sincere actors, right? But this gets to the questions of what does the future hold. I think it was like McKenna described it back then: renters, digital ownership, subscriptions. We're expanding horizontally by computer chips now, less in reality, and what you see is generally a pale imitation of things like the pyramid or the great structures that humanity, who had less technology, had the willpower and desire to build before. But again, you have to realize it's the same use of resources, the same slavery and work, right? Everyone who's intelligent figures out, right, that if they want to enjoy their life, then probably they don't want to live a life as a beast of burden, right? They actually want to have time to live what they otherwise might see as live, because work has been the bare bones minimum forever. It's not special, right? This goes back to the Greek state. It's why art matters at all. So because it's the only thing that overcomes nihilism and meaninglessness, new creation. So I'll leave out my darkest revelations about the future, but the future of the future is the present, You can tell how much people talk of the present subjects as they do. They keep speaking as if we're going to go back to classicist myth, or in other words, the 19th century. A belief in peak and purpose for place in the cosmos has all come undone, right? God is dead. There's nothing we can do to fix that or reverse that. People will be waking up to this forever, or like new struggles, right? People will be seeing the shadow of the Buddha burnt onto the cave wall forever, and they'll just be mystified and abstracted for thousands of years to come. People will keep waking up to this. Maybe by the future, all past knowledge will be wiped out and contained in the vaults like Mustafa Mons owns, right? Because it's just troublesome. People learning and knowing things is too troublesome. So, but I do think the idea that we're going to go back is delusion. They're missing the point that we only go forward, and the devil is taking the hindmost. The reality is taking the hindmost. People can afford to, the people can't afford to live in the old. Oh, I was saying where they can afford to, people live in the old medium, right? They check out into their own reality, and those who can always have. In other words, the ideal and beautiful man and world in my head is far more preferable to our mutually created reality, right? No, let me show you this vision. No, let me tell you about a better world, right? Let me tell you about a better model. Let me sell you something nice. In modern terms, we're left with all sizzle, but where is the steak? They took the steak, they ate the steak, they spit it up, and then ate it again, right? It's decadence. So this is sheer delusion. In other words, okay, by type, you see most people can't get past their own and others' initial projections, right? Because all meetings begin with projection. From there, you can see who or what is really there. This is where artist shines by creating new ideas and new perceptions, new conceptions, reveals new vistas, shows others what, why, how, and then what you can do with this, right? That's power. So the personality type's nature of intelligence and relation to power is always both the key and the lock, the creation, the recreation, and the destruction all in one. The future holds more of the same, including philosophers, intellectuals, poets, and artists, the likes of which the world has never seen. The selection, pressures, and personality types described here deem it no other way. Again, nothing arrives unaccounted for or unmentioned. We've only recently learned to think and beyond even affect, right, into affect. History is written in the aftermath and in retrospect amidst those who never knew what was really happening to begin with. Masses deselected for but circles backed around on the upper castes and classes. Nothing lasts forever, right? It was good while the ride lasted, baby. But you see that the real goal is stasis, right? Because that's the only stable condition upon which such predation and overpowering can take place. Without that, power can't, rot and decay. And without that, empire can't decline. And without that, the eternal return can't happen. So, right? And then again, the other forecast for the future is that people, especially as those who can wise up, do wise up. They're going to be less tolerant, more mean. And again, this isn't medical or legal advice. I'm just saying, well, to the degrees that people should learn to protect themselves, that if you thought someone else was coming to save you or redeem you or give you a better paycheck, no, that was always up to you to begin with. And the myth that was that someone else was in charge. There's the sun. The world loves, needs, and wants novelty, but funny enough, it's made hardest to make its great creators in the first place. Like the whole thing is just a pressurized system, which the genius can't even exist without the Hydra, and especially at this point, like Charles Bukowski says, like you can't have genius in a system of the same communications. You have to be shut out from that. You have to have terrible parents. You have to be buried underground. You have to be eaten and beaten alive. You have to be the product of a war zone, right? There's only going to be a higher attrition rate as the population declines, because I think it is on the decline. But the future holds more of the same, right? Okay, said that. So that's basically it. So this has been a brief discourse and conception of the evolution of humanity by proposition and understanding of a stable stratum of populations, of local intelligences, of personality types who make the world go round and always have, right? That is our reality, and it's been titled Beyond Psychoanalysis, Beyond Morality, Beyond Idealism, Intellect and Power Through an Evolutionary Lens. All right, Again, I'm Zach Markowski. Thanks for your time and your attention. And if we're both so fortunate to be here tomorrow, I will see you then. Thanks. Bye.